Hey everybody, I hope you had a wonderful break. I have a really neat lesson today to teach you about the inner parts of the stem. You looked a little bit last week at the inner parts of the leaf, and so we're going to see how the two of those work together, and then talk about something new to you today called monocots and dicots. So let's get started. So we're going to focus on three different types of stems. You know what the term annual means. Annual means it's a plant that's only going to grow 1 year. So if an annual plant has a stem, it's going to be very soft and green. It's going to be very fleshy, which means it's very flexible. You can kind of bend it a little bit without it breaking, but it's only going to live for that 1 year, or that one growing season. So next year you're not going to get any new stems. The second type of stem is called an herbaceous perennial stem. We had just started discussing the term herbaceous. So this is a plant that will come back for you after it dies in the winter. But it's going to lose its stems, its branches in the wintertime, and the only thing living will be the root system. And then next year it will have new stems that will emerge in the spring. So these stems are still going to be very soft, flexible, and what we call fleshy. But this is still a perennial plant. It will live for multiple years, but it just doesn't grow or build on the existing branching structure. It grows new branches every year. The third type of stem is what we call a woody stem. So these are your perennial plants that are deciduous. So they lose their leaves in the wintertime, or they can be an evergreen plant. So they keep their leaves in the wintertime. But the main thing about a woody plant is that it's not going to lose its branches or stems in the wintertime. They're going to stay there, which means they're going to grow upon itself each year and get larger and longer. So they tend to appear to be usually more brown or gray in color because it produces a bark. They're going to get larger each year. They're going to be a little bit stronger. Somewhat more brittle. If you bend them, they're not going to be as flexible. So when we're talking about these types of stems, we're focusing on a group of plants called vascular plants. And vascular plants have vascular tissue inside of them, and that transports water, nutrients, and sugars. So what vascular tissue is a very specialized tissue. It's meant to provide support for the plants. It helps keep them strong and standing up, but it also transports materials up and down the plant. So two things that are going to be vital to be a part of that vascular system is the tissue called phloem and the tissue called xylem. So these are in charge of the transport of all of those materials from the soil, coming through the roots of the plants, through the stem, and then up through the leaves, and then out of the leaves. We looked at the inside parts of your leaf last week, or before you went on break. And inside we saw a little chamber called the vascular tissue. We'll look at that in a second. But those two channels inside that vascular tissue, phloem is in charge of moving the manufactured food down from the stem. So we know that food for the plant is in the form of glucose, and we know that that glucose gets made mostly in the leaves during the process of photosynthesis. So if the food is being made up in the leaves, it has to be transported down through the stem and into the root system where it can be stored. So the phloem is the channel or the tissue that flows that food or the sugars down through the plant. Xylem is the tubing, the channel, whatever you want to call it, but the tissue that's going to move water or moisture up from the soil through the roots, through the stem, all the way up to the leaves. And it also is going to take the minerals up as well through the water. So let's look at that picture of the inner part of the leaf we looked at previously. So right here we have what's called vascular tissue. And the best way I can describe the vascular tissue, better known as the vascular bundle, is like a straw. But this straw has two parts to it. So that vascular tissue is that outer part that basically combines two straws inside of it. The xylem is what's going to carry the water and minerals from the roots all the way up to the leaves. And then the phloem is going to take the sugars that are made in the leaves and send that all the way down to the roots. Okay, so this is technically your plant's veins. So as we've been studying plants' vein patterns, we've been looking at the veins through the leaves. These are the vascular tissue. So inside of those veins, you have the water, the minerals, the sugars, everything that the plant needs to survive. All right, so these vascular plants are going to get divided into two groups. These are your gymnosperms and your angiosperms. Gymnosperms is going to also be a group that has things like ferns and also a few mosses, but most of your mosses and algae do not fall under vascular plants. So, but for today, we're going to talk about angiosperms for just a minute. Angiosperms are divided into two groups as well. We break these into monocotyledons and dicotyledons. So pause for just a second. I want you to watch this cool video that explains the difference in how we categorize monocotyledons and dicotyledons.
So plants are cool. August, you want to show them this? Medicinal purposes. Number one, this plant is edible. It's poisonous. You would die. The plant that killed Socrates. And I know that because I do know a lot of cool plants, but I also know how to group them into similar categories in my head. Now today, I'm going to show you how to group most flowering plants into two different categories. Today, we have a whole bunch of flowering plants that we're going to plant. By flowering plants, I'm talking about the angiosperms, which are any plants with flowers. And those are different from the gymnosperms like pine trees, the mosses, the ferns, and all of the other primitive plants.
Every one of these flowering plants we got can be divided into one of two categories, either a monocot or a dicot.
So here's the backstory. For flowering plants, biologists had finally divided them up into two groups, monocots and dicots, the members of which tended to share similar features. So here are the features we most commonly use. Monocots like this lily are usually in multiples of 3.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Dicots have petals generally in multiples of 4 or 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Monocots typically have parallel veins, while dicots are net veined. If you pull up a monocot, most of the time it'll have these fibrous, spreading, or they call them adventitious roots. While the taproot, that's classic dicot. Stems. Cut the stem of a monocot in cross-section, and you'll see something like this. Vascular bundles scattered all around. While in dicots, they're usually at the edge. Cotyledons. This refers to parts in the seed. Monocots, also known as monocotyledons, means one cotyledon in the seed. And dicots, like this bean, have 2. Okay, so there's about 250,000 species of flowering plants in the world. And with the 5 characters that I just showed you, about 75% of those have been classified as dicots, and about 23% have been classified as monocots. What that means is there's about 2% that don't fit the classification so well. So recently, they've kind of revised our understanding of flowering plants. We think the evolutionary tree looks a bit like this. You see, early on, a few groups broke off. Then, other small groups came off of that. In the end, the monocots were classified here, and the dicots are classified here. But, other than the water lily relatives and the magnolia relatives, which contain most of that other 2% of flowering plants, the rest are still monocots and dicots. Okay, so now go out, see if you can identify those plants. If you like what we're doing, of course we got more videos up here to watch, and you can subscribe to our feed.
Okay, so that shows you a really neat way to look at how monocots and dicots are categorized. So if we're looking at monocot plants, take out a sheet of notebook paper if you haven't already, so that you can make yourself a little chart. We're going to compare monocots versus dicots really quick. So the easiest way to tell a monocot versus a dicot, and I'm sure there are a few exceptions to the rule, but these are great ways to help you very quickly categorize them. The first one is the leaf vein pattern. So a parallel leaf vein pattern, as you know, is where the veins run parallel to one another, kind of like the lines of a highway. That's usually characterized as a monocot. So scattered leaf vascular bundles. So if you took a stem and you did like a cross section of it, you'd be able to see these vascular bundles that have the veins in them, your xylem and phloem, all scattered throughout that stem. So there's no real pattern, okay? Usually if you're looking at the flower parts, these are like your petals, of your flower, they're going to be in multiples of 3, like you see in this picture. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 petals, so that's a multiple of 3. And then also a 1 cotyledon, which is your seed leaf. We'll talk about those next week. So that's where they get their name, is from the cotyledon. There's only 1 cotyledon, so that's why they get monocot, because mono means 1. The other thing they told you in the video is your root systems, so we'll look at that in a second. The characteristic of dicots. So your dicots usually have branched leaf vein patterns. Branched leaf vein patterns are the pinnate and palmate vein patterns. They're going to have continuous vascular bundles, and they're going to be in rings, okay? So these vascular bundles on a dicot plant, they're going to build on each other each year. You see the years as they build round and round and round, creating that inner layer of the stem, creating these rings, because each year you get a new ring of vascular bundles. So the other thing you would see is if you counted your flower petals, they would be in multiples of 4s and 5s. And then they're going to have 2 cotyledons, which are 2 seed leaves inside of your seed. So 2, di means 2. So this is why we get the term dicots or dicotyledons. So the majority of your dicots are going to be your larger plant material, your shrubs and your trees, because they build on each other, and they're going to be more of a woody stem. Whereas your monocots are very commonly an herbaceous perennial or commonly an annual. So let's compare those side by side if you want to look at that cross section of a stem. So this is a fleshy stem. It's green all the way through. There's no dead wood in the center because it's only lived for 1 year. So if you're looking at under a microscope, those vascular bundles would be all kind of scattered throughout that stem. If it's an herbaceous dicot stem, herbaceous means it's probably going to just die back that year, they're still going to be in a nice ring fashion. Whereas a woody dicot, you're going to have rings that build on each other year after year as that stem continues to grow and it never dies back. So those vascular bundles create these rings. All right, so if you're writing a chart, this is where you want to make sure you've got them all written down to kind of compare the two. Examples of monocot are things like grasses and corns, your annual plants that have these long parallel vein patterns and kind of a linear leaf. Again, your flower parts, multiples of 3, whereas a dicot would be multiples of 4s and 5s. So good example of dicots are your larger trees and shrubs. We're going to stop there for today. So make sure you've created a chart because we're going to go on to our assignment. And as you see on Google Classroom, I have posted your assignment and it's really pretty simple. All I want you to do is go outside and take a walk today. And I would like you to find a few examples of a monocot and a dicot. I would like you to take pictures of these, and then you're going to put those onto a Google Doc real quick and upload those as your assignment. So you can find a plant that has parallel leaf veins, and that would be a picture and a representation of a monocot. You could find a flower that has 9 petals. Well, this would obviously be a monocot as well. So you could take a picture of that flower showing those 9 petals. An example of a dicot could be a leaf that has either pinnate or palmate vein patterns, or that has flowers with petals in groups of 4s or 5s. Or you could even find an old stump where you can see the inner parts of the stem and you can see the vascular bundles creating your rings. So there's a couple different options there. It's a pretty easy assignment. It won't take you very long, but I do want you to get out and actually find it on your own. Please don't take pictures off of the internet. I can tell. Have fun.